Looking back to the person of the historical Jesus that we find in all the four Gospels, we find a man that was often misunderstood, persecuted, challenged, rejected, and eventually condemned to a horrible death. But at the same time, we see a man that never backed down from his convictions. He had a clear mission, and he never let an obstacle or roadblock get in the way of completing that mission. And the mission for Jesus was clear. He came to do the will of the Father. Both are facts that we pick up in the gospel, that Jesus was certainly misunderstood, rejected, eventually murdered, and yet that same Jesus never stepped away from the mission given to him. Today's gospel, I believe, is a wonderful illustration of the difficult environment that Jesus so often had to face in his ministry. There's so many examples, but today's really a very good example of what Jesus had to encounter on almost on a daily basis. And we're going to go back and look at 3 chapters before the gospel, the chapter that we find today, chapter 3 in the Gospel of Mark. And we're going to go back and look at the earlier events. And in those events, we find Jesus very, very active in the community. He's not sitting in a temple. He's not in a home somewhere. He's not out fishing. Not yet. He fishes a lot, but he didn't in this part of Mark's gospel. But we do find Jesus in those first 3 chapters is he cures a demoniac, one possessed by a devil. He then cures Simon's mother-in-law from a very serious illness. He has cured a large gathering of people who had multiple illnesses when he was speaking to them in great crowds. And he went around and touched people and healed people. He cured a paralytic so that paralytic could walk again. And he cured a man with a withered hand. He was busy for 3 chapters, doing the work and the mission that he was given himself. And yet, see what happens in the gospel we hear today. After all of what we would think would be a reason to praise Jesus, my gosh, he was healing people. He was curing them. He was bringing compassion to them, giving them hope, renewing them, sending them forth. You would think that would be some reason to be giving him praise and adulation. But what we see in the gospel today is we got a group of scribes, self-righteous, who had come from Jerusalem for one reason, to condemn the works that Jesus was doing and curing. They were saying that the only reason Jesus was doing this because he was in league with the devil, that he himself was possessed by the devil. This was the claim they made. This is what they were saying against him in the gospel today. And it seems so silly, their argument, when you really look at it. But we need a little history to understand that, perhaps. Sickness, illnesses, physically, mentally, in that time in which Jesus lived, those illnesses and other kinds of difficulties were considered to be a result of sin. That the person must have sinned. That's why they're paralytic. That's why they're blind. That's why they can't hear. That's why they're crippled. That was the concept. And if it wasn't that person, then it was their spouse, their husband or wife. Or it was one of their kids. Or maybe it was grandpa. But somebody was responsible for that sin, and therefore that was passed on to the person that suffered. So understanding that, So when Jesus goes and begins to cure and to take care of those that are sick, he's showing much greater power than the devil, because he's reversing the evil. He's reversing the badness that's going on. And so their argument really looks silly when you think of it. How could be aligned with Satan, who's the source of sin? How can Jesus be aligned with him when Jesus is destroying that sense of sin? And so their argument really looks silly in front of the reality of that time. But then the gospel even goes on, and Jesus, you think, could take a little breath. He kind of made the scribes shut up a little bit because they couldn't respond to what he said. And then what happens is his relatives seem to turn against him. They come looking for him, we're told, because they're worried he has, quote, lost his mind. Right? They were worried about him. And they had a reason, in some sense, because the word already been spread that the Pharisees and the Herodians were looking for a way to arrest and to kill Jesus. But they were concerned, too, because Jesus seemed to be, wherever he went, he was causing all of this conflict and all of this disturbance by the so-called leaders, religious leaders. And so his family was worried about that. Maybe they're going to turn on them also. Or maybe, Jesus is going to cause so much trouble that they're going to be run away themselves. And so, but Jesus, here he is, being attacked by the scribes and now even being questioned by his family. They're worried. And so Jesus reacts to this concern by reminding them that his family is now more than a biological relationship with a few, but now his relationship of family includes all people who will do his will, emulate his example, and put into practice his perfect love. And so Jesus, at first, it looks like he's kind of offending his family. Who's my brother and sister and my mother? And he points to the people out there. He says, those are the ones I got to take care of. That's my mission. Don't tempt me from doing that. Don't keep me from doing that and keeping me home. And so it really was again, that strong commitment that Jesus had. So what can the gospel teach us today? What stands out to me is how hard it is and can be to stand up for Christian values in our present day society. It's really hard. It's really hard to really live those values, but to proclaim those values and challenge against those that do not practice those values. In order to do so, we're called upon really to be countercultural. We're asked to be brave enough to be able to speak Jesus' values, to complete his mission. And that's not easy. Some examples: to proclaim and defend life at all stages, from conception to natural death. People will look at us and say, are you out of your mind? Or to honor and respect the great gift of human sexuality. Are you out of your mind? To welcome the stranger, to proclaim the wonder and beauty of marriage, to care for the poor and the needy, and to speak out against unjust and discriminatory policies. We will be challenged when we want to do that and should do that. Like Jesus, some will think that we truly are out of our mind. We're not with it. We're not really looking at what society really thinks it should be. We're kind of old-fashioned. And so we take, sometimes, like Jesus, we take a beating. Today's gospel should shake some of our complacency. We have become Jesus's family, Jesus's kin, if you wish, by baptism. And so we now are his brothers and sisters. We're part of his family, but it's when we do his will that we're really part of the family. But what this gospel is saying is that this is not enough. We are not the Lord's family unless we are struggling day by day with some questions. And these might be, what does the Lord want me to do with the rest of my life? Is my discipleship countercultural, or am I just going with the flow? Do I really care about the terrible poverty and injustice in our world? The breakdown of the family, the materialistic and egotistic greed that controls our world, the lack of respect for life, marriage, family values? Maybe the hardest question is this: and what am I willing to do about it?